So I work in the unit dealing with marine environment and clean water services. Well, so part of it is freshwater and more urban wastewater, and the other one is the marine environment. And mostly we implement the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which is relevant in some part to the aquaculture activities in the marine environment. So we'll see that at the end of the presentation. You could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so what's the international context? And this is my point of view, and it might be incomplete, especially this one slide. So as far as I can see, I mean, as regards the international context, we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are relevant to aquaculture, zero hunger, so that's SDG 2, I think. Responsible consumption and production might be SDG 8, climate action, and life below water, which is SDG 12, if I'm not mistaken. You also have the FAO's Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, and there might be further work on directly towards aquaculture, but I must confess I'm not fully aware of that. You can move to the next slide. So now the EU context, and for that one I'm a bit more aware. Obviously, the Green Deal is the big flagship initiative of the Commission for this mandate. So among other things, you have the biodiversity strategy for 2030, the Farm to Fork initiative, the nature restoration law, which will be adopted hopefully by summer in June actually, and the strategic guidelines for aquaculture. From my perspective, they're all relevant to aquaculture, especially in the marine environment. You also have fisheries, because the common fisheries policy does cover aquaculture, sustainable aquaculture. And as far as environment is concerned, you have a number of directives and regulations and initiatives. So I'll list them. The Strategic Environment Assessment Directive, the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive, the Birds and Habitats Directive, because as far as I understand, you may have aquaculture activities inside Natura 2000 sites. There's no mismatch between these two. Also, regulations on alien species, because obviously aquaculture might, in the process of importing new species into EU waters, you might also import alien species. The Water Framework Directive, which is mostly relevant for freshwater, and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So at the end of the presentation, I will touch upon most of those regulations and directives. And as far as research is concerned, and on that one, I'm really not an expert. You have Horizon Europe, of course, which includes the Mission Ocean, and the MFAF, which is the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. So this is managed by DG Mare, and I'm pretty sure you're working with them on a daily basis. So my conclusion, and since you're focusing on research, my conclusion is that green, so DG Environment, let's say, blue, DG Mare, and all human activities at sea must go hand in hand. And we need more research and more knowledge to bridge the gaps, especially as far as we want to deliver the objectives under the Green Deal. You can move to the next one. So challenges in brief, that's obvious things, but sometimes it's useful to state the obvious. So you have crises ongoing or past ones, Brexit, COVID, the war in Ukraine. There seems to be an international move to retreat a bit back from the globalization, back to closer to home. So blocks, whether it be the EU, China, or other blocks. Of course, the biodiversity and climate crisis are very much high on the public agenda and on the political agenda. For marine aquaculture, you obviously need protein. A lot of them is derived from fish stocks in the wild, and which is used for feed. So if you want, sorry, if aquaculture is further set to increase, you need to find probably alternative sources of proteins and feed. We have food security issues. At EU level, we still import 2/3 of our seafood. Some of it is partially probably unregulated or badly regulated. Some of it is not sustainable. We have the invasive alien species issues and the pollution, and that's very varied, and probably other challenges which I did not mention. Might move to the next slide. So whenever you have challenges, obviously you need to be able to get a hold of opportunities. So opportunities, one of them would be more research and knowledge, which we need to help deliver the Green Deal objectives. Aquaculture is also a source of nature-based solution. For instance, oyster aquaculture can capture CO2, or other, let's say, mariculture, aquaculture for algae and others. And they also can deliver environmental services that can help address the planetary crisis, so biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and so on. And all in all, the aquaculture must be included in a fully integrated food system approach, so to help bridge all the gaps we have. So the objective under the DG Mare guidelines for sustainable aquaculture, of course, is to scale up the EU aquaculture, but we also need to implement the Green Deal, and that's the objective. And we need to keep our high environmental standards. So challenge, but also opportunities. You may move to the next slide. So briefly, just to, I'm not going to read that, but I'm just quoting a couple of articles and paragraphs in the Common Fisheries Policy, and that's from Article 2 of the CFP, just to show that it does cover fishing, obviously, but also aquaculture, and it aims at ensuring that those two are environmentally sustainable in the long term, implementing an ecosystem-based approach, and it also endeavor to ensure that aquaculture avoids the degradation of the marine environment. And obviously, this is the basis for the development of the guidelines for sustainable aquaculture. Next slide, please. So still on the CFP, again, sustainable aquaculture in the EU, and a very good part which we like, which is Article 25J. The CFP shall be coherent with the Union environmental legislation. In particular, the objective of achieving good environmental status. This directive is the MSFD. I will touch upon that later. And so in sum, the CFP covers sustainable aquaculture, the ecosystem approach to management, and contributes to delivering the objectives under the EU's environmental legislation. Next slide, please. So now, what do we do in DG Environment in relation to aquaculture? So the two first ones, I must say, I looked up on our web pages because I'm not really acquainted with those two directives, but the SEA and EIA do apply to a wide range of public and or private projects, and the last one in particular includes aquaculture. So as far as I understand, those apply when there is a new project for an aquaculture plant or similar activities. You also have two regulations concerning invasive alien species. So the first one is really specific to the use of alien and locally absent species in aquaculture, and it sets rules for the authorization of use of non-EU species, let's say, and make sure as far as possible they don't become invasive if they escape from the aquaculture facilities. And the second one is more general, and it does not apply to species listed in Annex 4 to the regulation above, but there might be other species which are not listed in Annex 4 and might be interesting for aquaculture. This I'm not certain, to be honest. Next slide. Now, the Water Framework Directive is bit more relevant for freshwater aquaculture. It does, however, cover all the impacts on water, and so it includes transitional water up to 1 nautical miles at sea. And the main objective is to achieve good ecological status of the water bodies. So it has various tools which are used to deliver those means and objectives. And there's a specific guideline on the application of the Water Framework Directive to aquaculture activities. So if you're interested or not aware, you may want to have a look at that one, and that's why I provide the link. And next slide, please. So now this the MSFD, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, is the directive which my unit takes care of. And similar to the Water Framework Directive, here the objective is to achieve a good environmental status of the EU marine waters. And there's a list of 11 descriptors for each of which you need to reach GS. And basically the objective of this directive is to reconcile the environmental protection and the sustainable use of marine waters by human activities. So it is a framework directive, which means it touches upon plastic pollution, fisheries, noise in water, contaminants, and so on and so forth, but it does not regulate those activities directly, because you have sectoral regulations and directive regulating the sectoral sectors themselves. For instance, fisheries is covered by the common fisheries policy, but the MSFD does set objectives and threshold values that need to be reached to make sure that the human activities use the marine environment in a sustainable way, so that in sum the impact on the marine environment of human activities is below a threshold, or below a ceiling, let's say, that is acceptable and does not impair the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem. Next slide. So there's a list of 11 descriptors, and I think I tried to select those which I think are most relevant for aquaculture. But if you look up the MSFD, you will see the full list. So in my view, those 4 or 5 are most relevant to aquaculture, insofar that aquaculture may have impact on those indicators. So non-indigenous species, which is similar to invasive species. Element of the food webs occur at natural abundance levels and diversity, and the long-term abundance of the species in the ecosystem is not impaired. So that might have to do with possible escapes from aquaculture facilities. Eutrophication is minimized and does not give rise to adverse effects on the water. Same thing. Pollution from aquaculture facilities. The concentration of contaminants does not give rise to pollution effects. And the last one, marine litter does not cause harm to coastal and marine environment. So in my view, all of those may or might be relevant for aquaculture activities. Next slide. And in the MSFD, you have a couple of annexes that lists the human activities that are potentially affecting the marine environment. So as you can see, aquaculture is mentioned both for marine waters and also freshwater. But these are not the only ones, because there is a list of about 30 activities impacting or potentially impacting the marine environment. Next slide, please. And in Annex 2A of the MSFD again, you have a list of pressures that are relevant to the marine environment in relation to human activities. And I selected the ones I thought were most relevant for aquaculture. So you have a list of biological pressures, input of non-indigenous species, potential impact of microbial pathogens, GMOs, translocation of native species, and so on and so forth, and the input of substances like organic matter, so the input of synthetic substances, so it could be pharmaceuticals and other things like this, and litter, solid waste and micro litter as well, potentially. Next slide. Okay, here you have the list of the 11 descriptors and the level to which the member states, so all the coastal, the 23 or 22 member states as a whole, could conclude on the status of their marine waters in relation to good environmental status. So as you can see, we have a mixed picture for some of the descriptors. For instance, D5 eutrophication. It's been a long-studied subject, of course, and you have also variations across the marine waters. So, for instance, obviously in the Baltic, eutrophication is a very big issue. It's a bit less so in other EU waters, but as you can see, 90% of the member states could conclude on where they stand relative to good environmental status for eutrophication. And it's because there's a long history of studying this subject behind this eutrophication issue. If you go to D11 and energy and especially underwater noise, it's not that the problem is new, but it's that it's been studied for not such a long time, and therefore the level of knowledge is still developing, and that's why you have only 12% of the member states being able to conclude on this subject. And for the rest of the descriptors, you have a varied picture as well. So ranging basically between 12% to 90%. And I believe this is the last slide. Or close.
Yes.
Yes, that's the last slide. So thank you for your attention. I hope I was not too long.